Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming today. Thanks for joining us for the finale of our Cohesion Amongst Chaos BIPOC Summer Speaker Series. Today our topic is going to be equity. And my name's Stella Nall. I'm a painter and poet in town here and a member of the Cohesion Art Collective Community Board. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we are and then introduce our wonderful panelists, and then we'll get into it. So our mission with Cohesion is to connect and amplify local BIPOC artists. We believe that art intrinsically creates representation, sparks conversation, and is an accessible way to share and learn about culture. And we're thrilled to spotlight 4 BIPOC artists on stage today: multimedia myth maker Natalita, photographer Alex Kim, and rapper Renaud. Leading our discussion today is the very talented Joseph Grady. Joseph Grady is an actor, artist, and higher education professional with many film and television roles to his credit. Joseph graduated from UM with a degree in social work with focuses in Native American studies and theater. He served the Missoula community in a public speaking capacity for more than a decade and has repeatedly answered the call to advocate for social justice in the region. In his professional academic career, Joseph Grady serves as an associate director for Montana 10 at the University of Montana and Missoula College. And that's everybody who's up here. So thank you and welcome to our panel. Okay.
Big round of applause for Stella. Thank you so much, Stella, for the wonderful introduction. And thanks everyone, of course, for joining us, and those who will be viewing through the video format. So welcome to today's conversation. We are going to be discussing equity. My name, of course, is Joseph Grady. I use he, him pronouns. I'm Anskapi Pakani. I'm an artist, actor, academic advisor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. With a social work background, I do want to acknowledge that my own male privilege in this space, and I will strive to not suck all the oxygen out of the room. This is a conversation, and we are not here as experts per se, but there being diversity represented among this panel, I do think we have our own informed experiences. We'll begin with a brief land acknowledgement. Let's take a moment to acknowledge and reflect on the tens of thousands of years of Indigenous history in this place, from its earliest inhabitants, dating back to a time immemorial, to the most recent peoples pushed out by manifest destiny. This includes our fellow creatures, inhabitants, the walkers, crawlers, flyers, and swimmers. Let's also be mindful that as Indigenous people, we still exist and thrive in these ancient and sacred spaces. So please be respectful and mindful of that experience as we gather here today. Thank you. As BIPOC who live here locally, we have very storied lives, which undoubtedly seeps into our creative process in some way or another. Sometimes those factors are nuanced, while others take a more direct path to their interpretation. We are people in the community with informed experiences that are imbued with hard-earned truths. That said, we are not locked entirely into tragedy or plight narratives. And I like to be clear about that. Certainly the struggles and oppression felt throughout BIPOC communities hold deep roots, and the tragedy of police violence is certainly not lost on us. However, this is not the sum of our parts, and though we do place considerable energy into organizing around the losses we see happening every day, we do also embrace humor, celebration, family, community, success, and mirth. I'm sure today's conversation has the opportunity to move in any of these directions, and so I ask our audience to please recognize and acknowledge the courage and generosity of our panelists for joining us here today. And before we get started here, please join me in a moment of applause to welcome these amazing creative talents. All right, let's please be mindful, attentive, and intentional in our listening as we take this time to now meet our panelists Please, as we'll just kind of go down the line, jump in when ready. Please introduce yourself and perhaps share with the audience a little about your creative outlet and what you do here locally. Jump on in.
My name's Zane. I rap under the name Renault. I grew up in Missoula here. I've been here for 30 years, I guess. And I manage a window washing company in town and spend a lot of time coaching mostly high schoolers, but also middle schoolers in track as well as cross country.
My name is Alex, and I work as a photographer, and I also run an outdoor program called Here Montana.
My name is Natalita, and I am a myth maker, and I use sound, music, body movement to tell the stories of the terrains that I visit and the societies that I end up living in. I'm still figuring out what I'm doing in Missoula and what my place is here. I'm figuring that out, and I've found myself just needing to listen more to reflect what's actually here instead of what I want here. But yeah, so I'm still figuring that out.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome. I really appreciate your willingness to come and share your experience, reflect on some of the questions that I have for you. Equity is our topic. And I was going through and reviewing some information. I was Googling, of course. I tend to, and many others, like perambulate this topic, right? And so I wanted to kind of reach outside myself and look for something that was accessible in terms of some summary before we start this conversation. And I came across this this part of a post. Actually, it's a quote from a post, a blog post from on the Annie Casey Foundation called "Equity versus Equality and Other Racial Justice Definitions." And as I was reading it, I thought it would be really valuable to share in this space. And so I'm quoting it. Often race-focused conversations derail because people are using the same terms in different ways. One of the challenges of communicating effectively about race is to move people from the narrow and individualized definition of racism to a more comprehensive and systemic awareness. To illuminate racism, we need to name it, frame it, and explain it. Establishing a shared language to present data, describe conditions and outcomes, and identifying root causes of inequality serves an important function. A common language creates narrative that makes it easier to communicate the commitment to racial equity both internally and externally. And it creates a platform for coordinated work toward equitable outcomes. Basically putting context to the term. I think we often look at racial conversations as being really sort of hardline, black and white kinds of contexts, and I think a lot of people go there in their minds, but I believe it's a lot more nuanced than that. But furthermore, this I think is what really much of these conversations are about. Each of them has been on a topic. Today is equity. And so to dive into that, I also pulled this one from the internet just briefly, but thought it was an apt characterization just in general. So equity is defined as the state quality or ideal of being just, impartial, and fair. The concept of equity is synonymous with fairness and justice. It is helpful to think of equity not simply as a desired state of affairs or a lofty value, but rather to achieve and sustain equity, it needs to be thought of as a structural and systemic concept. And so that's really the tack that we're going from here today, is in that social justice perspective. And of course, you attach other, I think, intersecting identities to that: racial equity, social equity, ableism, and so forth. And you can like put it in similar contexts that tend to overlap in other areas, but the term itself talks about fairness. So, equity. This is a question for you, the panelists. And as we go through these questions, I, of course, invite our audience to also reflect on how you interpret the questions that are being put forward. So, and we'll answer, whoever wants to jump in, please do so. If we sit here and just kind of stare at each other, I might reach out and say, what do you think? So that said, first question, and some of these are two-parters, so please forgive the lengthiness of some of them. Equity. Is this a term or theme that presents itself in your life? Okay, that's the first part of it. And do you ever incorporate it, or does the concept of equity ever factor into your creative process? Let that marinate for a second.
I'll go first. Well, when I still cannot really understand equity. English is my second language, and I've been trying to wrap my mind around it. And April sent me an image that has been a lot easier for me to understand, and it was someone looking over a fence and then someone on their knees with someone shorter standing on them to look over the same fence. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely so.
So that's been making it a little easier for me to understand the concept, and I feel like that's something that I try to consider as far as I often work with different bodies in the stories that I tell, and it feels really important for me to not just pay them, but give them the space that they need to move through the emotions that they have that they're not given in their own life. So it is something that I'd like to incorporate. I don't know if it's necessarily something I see often in Missoula specifically, but I'd like to see more of it, and I'd be curious too if you guys have experienced that within the community. But I think I try to do that. I try to get on my knees and help whoever is smaller than me to raise up. But there's always more work around that too.
Thank you. Thank you. Alex, thoughts?
Yeah, I think I am able to, I'm in a unique situation to help that in different ways, I guess. I take a lot of photos of representation. I think it's important. I think that it's something that, we live in capitalism, and often we see who we might see ourselves, or we might see people that, motivate us to do certain things. And so I've had the privilege to work with a lot of different people doing a lot of different things in society, and being able to document that and being able to put it forward into the broader society, and that way people have an opportunity to kind of see themselves represented, and use my photoing to get people's stories out there. And then I think also in the outdoor realm, I'm able to kind of elevate communities that want to participate in outdoor recreation, especially in the mountains. I think it's quite difficult to get outside, and it takes quite a bit of logistics and gear and things like that. And I'm able to just put together things to make sure that others have that opportunity to, get out there and do their thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we're, I think, talking about, of course, is creating that sort of that balance of opportunity. And I certainly am going to get to you and your reflection here, but I did want to comment briefly, because so often as BIPOC, that identity, there's an extra, oftentimes, layer of preparation, I guess, that happens leaving the house to go out into public, how you psychologically prepare for the gazes and the glances and the interactions and so forth, sometimes that are very overt and so forth. So getting out into those spaces and doing the unfamiliar can often be that little extra hurdle to get over, if you will. And I'm just really taking a moment here to comment on some of the work that you've been doing, and seeing the posts on Facebook, and people really, I think, taking some of those brave steps to get into those spaces and find other community in this local space that isn't always available, I think, as you go outside and look around. We were talking about the fair earlier, and that being another of these spaces that I'm like, whoa, that's a lot. There's a lot to sort of pour on. So commend you, of course, in that work, and thank you for the work that you've been doing. But let's, of course, get to your reflection on this question. Your thoughts, please.
I guess I would say that just in a day-to-day perspective, when I'm coaching, I have all levels of individuals that need the information, and so I want to treat the kid that maybe has athlete parents and is a couple steps ahead versus the kid that is trying sports for the first time. They should be given the same opportunity to the information that I am there to give them. And then as that pertains to like music that I make, there are a lot of artists in Montana, in Missoula especially. It's a small space for a lot of people. And so I really try to make it a point to not be in the way of other people and like be free with information that I have. What am I trying to say? I think it's always a good opportunity if somebody needs a hand up, you know, whether that's just like a smile at the door before they get on stage for the first time, or you know, a high five after a good set or whatever. I think everybody deserves that opportunity, and I know what it feels like to not get that when you show up, and so I'm trying to be an individual who doesn't perpetuate that blocking of other people's opportunities to pursue whatever they're doing.
Awesome. I hear in your comment an element of self-reflection in that, and I think doing our own part, I think, in that space. And, you know, I think about, you know, moments like this where we're all on stage and having this opportunity to share our experiences and hopefully, you know, I think the part of this objective is, of course, to be informative. I think what I've experienced at least is having the conversation around racial justice, equity, identifying some of the causality, strife, et cetera, can be an uncomfortable conversation. And, you know, I really relish these opportunities to talk about these more specific aspects like equity and fairness. We're really talking about fairness, and we're going to dive into that a little bit moving forward in terms of how that sometimes gets coded as a invasion on other people's rights. When you start making the world a little fair for other people, you're taking away from someone else's sense of fairness. So we'll kind of get into that moving forward, but that's it. So next question. Today, like I said, serves as an example. It's one of those moments in our lives where you have all been invited to the stage here to reflect on equity. Here's the question. Have you been asked to step forward in this way or in similar ways at other times? And how do these conversations around these kinds of topics impact you personally?
I think we've worked together in different realms as well. So I think running a community-based organization gets the community, the local government, just curious about how to do things and how to function and how to put together things. So yeah, I think I've been asked by the city and participated in that conversation as well. I think that community looks like however you want it to look like, and sometimes that doesn't include the government. Yeah.
All right. Some nice response there. Arno, yeah, go for it, man.
My dad is part of the Black Collective in town here, and they had me participate in their Juneteenth celebration, or is that what it was? I don't remember, this year. And I think it really makes you like come face to face with like what you have to explain to people, and really contextualize. I was asked to make and perform a couple songs, and I really had to like step out of like my day-to-day and make it a point to like make it presentable to other people. So it's like approachable, and that I'm not just, giving the same thing that I would give all the time, because other people don't have the same information and don't have the same experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really interesting to answer that question, not being from here originally and just having the kind of specific experience that my body calls upon in this area. And yeah, I don't know if I have a specific answer for that. it's just been really interesting to be somewhere where the land is so silenced. I feel in many ways in our culture, we need to decondition and deconstruct our inherited culture, the I, the me, the me, the me. And I feel like a big part of equity for me has been, how do I disassociate from as much credit for the work that I create and make it actually about spirit running through me in what I'm making, and being in a space specifically that is so puritanical and conservative and Nordic. It's been really interesting to see how all bodies, even POC, have kind of fallen into the identity of what they're creating and the I and the me. And that's how equity has sort of affected me, in the sense that I feel like it's not given me opportunities to have more shows or more opportunities, because I'm not moving from this place where it's like I'm the hot thing making the hot thing. It's more about God, and it's been really interesting to be somewhere where God is only associated in one way, but on a land that has a history where God is everywhere, and spirit, however you feel like you need to identify that. But yeah, I think even just beyond like helping voices and bodies that you won't particularly see in front of a screen or in a show or in a movie or in a myth, I think I'm really curious about, well, what does the land need from us here as well? And how do we unspin ourselves from our own, like, well, what do I need? What do I need? What do I need? Because that's important. But also, so is like the earth. I don't know if that was an answer. It was more just like a stream of thought. But so I'm still figuring that out. Just those are my thoughts.
Gotcha. That's precisely what we're looking for here, is to just kind of have a dialogue around, how I think some of these concepts translate into our own being and thinking. And I'm really glad that you mentioned what you mentioned, because as we were going through and I was reading everyone's bios and so forth, I saw myth maker, right? And I really was like fascinated by that. The indigenous storytelling is, of course, just like laced with, that creative myth that is designed to inform and share like, protocols and ways of being and things to avoid and so forth in life, right? As well as to connect to that creator piece. And that equity aspect is really what I was like trying to hopefully get out of that part of your story, because when we talk about those representations in these spaces, so often there's more of a colonialized lens, if you will, which of course is what you just mentioned. And as we were trying to like build on our own narratives and tell our own stories, that sort of history that you talk about in the mythos and so forth is so, you can't take it part and parcel from the indigenous identity. I really think that that's an important part of us finding a place of fairness and justice and equity, and I don't want to say equality, but that equity where we get to be ourselves in this space and celebrate those aspects of it, is something that I think is layered way deep behind, that part of the conversation. I'm really glad we're able to kind of get at some of this stuff today. So I encourage you to really kind of dig deep in terms of some of these questions. And I don't think that there's any wrong answer. I think your experiences are really what we're trying to draw from here. So definitely trust those directions. But thank you. Thank you for that. All right, so moving forward. All right, so let's discuss equity from a place of endeavoring to get your work out there. You had kind of touched on that briefly in your response. I'd like to kind of get a little more, but that said, do you find factors of bias in the local art community and marketplace, perhaps, that challenge the term equity when we see its use in branding and messaging?
Yeah. Again, this is my experience as a visitor coming here to this land, which I'm so grateful to be on, in this world that is a product of manifest destiny. This is a myth we're living in. I just think the lack of diversity, and I don't even mean like cultural and like ethnic, I mean just diverse ways of thinking and looking at the world and different types of worldview perspectives has been, we just need more of it. And I don't know, I know that's so scary, right? Because it's like, get your California out of my Montana. But as people come in, they're coming in with different perspectives and different worldviews, and even just the segregation between those who are indigenous to this land and those who came and colonized it. I'm just missing and needing connection. And since I've been here, this doesn't mean we've had the same experience, but since I've been here, I've just been like desperate for it. And I personally, from my perspective and what I create and what I do, it's been a struggle. It's been a struggle to get a show. It's been a struggle to be understood at the shows I have done. And a lot of that has to do with the spaces that there are for us to create in, the spaces that were built for, to share art. But I haven't felt seen, and that's okay. I'm just sitting with that a lot and wondering what this space needs from me, and not so much what I need from it. But I'm not making something that a lot of people are making here, and I'm not singling myself out. It's more just like, I think it'd be a lot easier if I made rock music. I'd just get a show in a second, I just would, and that's cool that that's here. But what else is there? And I just feel like I've had to fight a little harder in this space to be heard, which is funny because I'm so loud. But yeah, and even just connect. And I don't know if y'all feel this, but I feel a sense of like envidia, like envy in Missoula amongst like creatives and artists. And I just hope that we can connect more and like actually hang out. And it's hard because we're in Montana, which is the myth of like the loner Marlboro man, and everyone's by themselves. And I get that, and I've inherited that independence since I've been here. But especially the work that I do that's rooted in all of our indigenous roots is like the tribal community that I wish I could see more of, but I also believe is happening because we're all in this room having this conversation.
Thank you.
I'll actually buddy onto that just a little bit. I think how I would describe a similar thing is that everybody's just comfortable with what they're comfortable with. And you may have a great idea, or I may have a great idea, and people are willing to say, that's a great idea, but nobody's willing to step outside of their comfort to support the idea, whether that's booking a show or linking two people together. You kind of feel like, oh, I need to protect my assets, whether that's somebody I know or a place that I have a connection to, or anything like that. I think there's a lot of, I guess, like you said, the individualized meism, like, I need to do what's right for me in this space, and it doesn't allow for expansion, for people to grow and share and be a part of each other's work.
I think I can relate. I've also had very different experiences because I am in the outdoor industry, and that's huge here. And I also do art and do photos, and so I've been able to combine the two and highlight a lot of different people doing their thing outside. And I think that's been a very profound experience for me, because it helps me to understand like where I am in this place, and kind of how I can support folks as well. Also, there's like I think the creative field is a field where like, there's a portion of it where it comes from you. Like, it comes from me, that's my own aesthetic or my own feeling or whatever it is. And so if the broader platform that I'm putting my art out in is not familiar with that, it can be kind of hard sometimes to know or feel accepted in that way. Like, I remember when I first started doing, working with people that were doing outdoor things, I would just barter. I'd be like, hey, I want to learn how to do this. You teach me and I'll take pictures. And I just like bartered my way through this, and then finally figured out how to do it as my work. And but I think that the challenge is like it's very reflective to the communities that are here. It's very like you see how everyone is working really hard to forge a way on like a platform that isn't necessarily like set up for that. And so it's like working on like a canvas that already has a foundation of work on it, and for me to throw my work in that sometimes it doesn't feel right, but other times it feels like it like puzzles its way in there somehow. And yeah, it's an interesting way to like figure out where we all kind of fit in. Yeah.
This world is just so new. Like, this is one of the last states created, you know, so it's just so new. And for me coming here, it's felt like if I was male-bodied, if I was Anglo, I could get farther. And those are the bodies that I've kind of had to turn to, even in like promoting something. And that's just been my bodied experience. But yeah, I feel that it's just new. So, and when new perspectives come in, where does it fit in the mix? And how do you open the eyes and hearts of those who are used to one kind of way of seeing creativity in this space?
Yeah, and I think, you know, the social and racial justice movements across the country over the last couple of years has really forced and pushed a lot of that conversation in Missoula and in Montana. And so I think just for myself in the outdoor industry, you know, that's been a major place where that industry, when it comes to like marketing or media, because there's so much of it, you know, you can drive down the highway and see like the dude fly fishing on the billboard, you know, or like the family on the boat on the lake, like as a billboard. And being the person to be able to kind of like poke the bear and be like, but it could look so much different. Like how would we feel if we used a different family? And how would we feel if we used someone with a different ability? And so just like kind of questioning the norm of the industry has been really fun, I think, because for myself, I don't have anything to lose. And I think that the state, in terms of recreation, does have something to lose, and they recognize that. I think that they recognize that, you know, if Glacier National Park didn't have a bus full of Asian people going there, their revenue wouldn't be as high every year, right? And so like that's like something where it's like, but then like if Asian people don't see themselves there, then they're not going to want to go there anyways. So then like how do we incorporate this? Or, you know, like you go to the Flathead and there's a lot of Hispanic families that work there, and now they have their own stands, and it's dope. It's really cool to see that, you know, and it's like seeing English and Spanish, like driving, you know, and like seeing Salish and seeing all these different languages along the way, I think really like make it, just like a broader milkshake of a place to be in, you know.
Awesome, thank you. I mean, as I'm listening, there is, I think, an element that is coming forward that describes gatekeepers, and you know, access, I think, is another piece that we're talking about. Very recently, and just I think in a creative sense, we ask ourselves, what's in a name? We recently changed Bear Track to Bear Track's Bridge out here to honor a pretty, I think, important piece of history about some of that indigenous acknowledgement in place, right? And the response to that was interesting to track, and it was, to me, nothing very surprising, having lived in this state for a while. I think there was the installation of a rainbow crosswalk to acknowledge and try and show some allyship with our LGBTQ plus community, both locally and abroad. And the reaction, the response, the physical, people showing up and like peeling out on this thing was, I mean, it's so guttural in its pushback against these things. And I think that we're moving kind of toward that part of this conversation. And you present an interesting question, Alex, like why not more diverse representations in these spaces to tell our stories? Because as we look at the local leadership and access and consider, you know, how we are represented in the local space, an entity like Cohesion pops up because it literally wants to put BIPOC representation in the driver's seat, not just the dressing on the table, right? Or the interesting sort of decoration in the space, if you will. Well to be seen, but less to be heard. And I find that this very conversation happens because of that, right? We want to hear more from our BIPOC community on what your experiences are locally and abroad, of course, as well. All this to say that it creates this sense of maybe combativeness along the way. Of course, there are those people who are along with us. We have those allies. We have those people in our corner saying, get after it. But then we also have entities that say, well, your equity is my loss. And so moving forward.
I have a quick thing for that.
Please.
I'll make everybody in this room think about it. Think about all the nonprofits in Missoula, your city government, your local officials, and think about their demographics, their age, and their principal, like where they are in class in this society. And I think it's pretty obvious, like who is kind of like looking, has the opportunity and the power to kind of like look down and present opportunities to different people. I think you can say that for the creative industry as much as the nonprofit industry here. And it's not to say that anyone did anything wrong. I mean, I think during that time and phase in our society, there was opportunities for, you know, for women to go up into places of power, and there were places for men to go up, but now it's like, will there be space for other people, you know, like the LGBTQ plus community, the community with disabilities, different communities that, you know, you don't normally see. And so I always ask all the nonprofit EDs, like, when's your time up? You know, and I think it's not a rude question to ask. It's just a question of like, you know, your name's been on this piece of paper for the last 15 years, and in 15 years, a lot of things has happened. And if we don't see the change as a community, then what are you doing? You know, and that's a big advocacy piece that I work on for the outdoor program. Is I FOIA a lot of the companies here in town, and I figure out where they're getting their money from, who they're getting their money from, who's their directors, who's your CFO, why did you get this position? And then I ask them, like, you know, you're making this much money in this town, how about you donate this much money? It's this much of your annual income. That's not public information, but it is now. And so, like, I think there are ways that we can be like more like abrasive to the system, because I think in Missoula that kind of like platform is very hard to break through. It's really hard to break through, I would say, actually, in any industry. I'm sure in music and in myth making and all that, it's hard. It's hard to kind of like break through because you have to ask for permission all of the time. And I think occasionally it feels good to like poke the bear, you know, just like.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, I mean, that is the segue into the next question, literally. And when I was reading that quote, it reads somewhere in here that some equity and some of these concepts can be viewed as lofty and oftentimes challenging to other belief systems and so forth. And you know, part of the question was going to be, as you go out into these spaces, be it the nonprofit, right, the 501c3 spaces, the spaces that really are, I think, in label and some of that messaging I mentioned earlier on equity, et cetera. How much of ourselves do we see represented in those spaces? And I mean this I think in all respect to the people who have been doing the work to some degree, but moving forward. We're talking about paid positions in these spaces. And I do want to be really clear, and I hope I'm not like doxing anyone's opportunity here, but Cohesion pays their panelists to come and be on stage. This is something that they invest in terms of the value of the people on stage. It's not of course big money. There's not big money to be had, but it does put something in your pocket, and it says that your value here is more than just, hey, we need you to solve this problem for us. Could you come to the table once again for free, by the way, and put forward your blood, sweat, and tears, so we can learn about this. And I think historically what we have seen is that self-promotion in those spaces to get that, either that rate increase or that next move to say, look what I got under my belt right over here. I've got all this equity and got all this racial justice work happening behind me. But what are the faces that are actually representing, I think, these directives in our public spaces and in our community? And it's challenging work. It's hard. And it's even harder to do for free, on top of the other stuff that we're involved with and so forth. So that's it. Are you seeing yourself reflected? And this is a fair question for you as well, in our leadership pool here, in terms of the pieces that are working toward that equity piece, or at serving the public interest.
I see myself when I look at the land, but I don't feel, not that people aren't doing the work that they need to, it's just how do we really pull ourselves out of this world? Like, there's so much internal work that needs to be done too on ourselves, and I'm not quite sure if I necessarily feel reflected in the top dogs of whoever's handling what's going on in Missoula, but I know that I'm in there somewhere, because I think when I step forward knowing that we're all connected, I'm in there somewhere. It's just, do they even know how to access that, what I am inside of them? I'm not quite sure. I don't know everyone who's like in charge here though, so if I'm missing anyone, yeah, I will Google it. And I just wanted to say something as far as loss, if that's okay, as far as equity. I've been thinking that a lot, been coming up with creative ideas in my own head as far as like what equity would look like for me in this community, in this world. And yeah, I think if in regards to loss, that is something that happens. I mean, we're standing up here on this platform because we recognize that we were born into a world that treats us like an other. And there's a loss in that. There's a dehumanization in that. And my ultimate goal for myself and for whatever lineage is connected to me and all humanity is to be humanized. I want to be a human one day. I love the whole like BIPOC, all that. That's beautiful. We had to create that to be human. And we have to keep making work to just become human one day. And there's a loss in that. And when we think of loss, if we are only looking through the puritanical lens, which we come from and created this world, it's binaric. Like, you're only losing, you're never winning and losing at the same time. But you can, and that paradox exists. And we've experienced loss and winning at the same time. And if we look at each other like a human tribe, we can experience loss and understand that when our brothers and sisters in our family grow and are raised up, we are also being raised up in those ways as well. Silencing, I know what it's like to be silenced, and I've learned so much in that, and I'm curious about if anyone in the community would even willingly silence themselves to bring up those who have been silenced. I don't know if that was an answer.
Awesome, thank you so much. And Alex, thank you, of course, for, again, I think when I was preparing for this conversation, I was like, oh, I hope we get into it, I hope we drop some of this knowledge on the space and talk about, some of what you shared as well, is that sometimes you got to be in it to win it. And getting involved and so forth, again, it can be costly, but this is the time that we're in, right? And I've always looked at the next generation and the next generation and those generations that have come before us and so forth, who've done that like marathon run of advancing our rights and our ability to feel comfortable in space, even if by inches or millimeters, right? Which tells me that I've got to get in and do my part as well and participate. But it's also exhausting in terms of this kind of narrative and getting into spaces where, we'll put it this way, Missoula's 96% identifies and is polled at 96% Caucasian or white. That was, I think, part of my reaction when I first started looking at these statistics and understanding what it is that we're really talking about here and trying to see ourselves represented in the public framework. And oftentimes, even when you get access, right? Even when you're at the table, even when you're a decision maker and you're in a space where campus is no different, University of Montana, where you get in leadership spaces and you're surrounded by people who don't have any inkling of what that experience is and that privilege of not having to worry about it, right? And that's really what we're talking about when we use that term, privilege. It's literally not having to worry about something, right? Because it just doesn't enter into your sphere, if you will. And so the preparations that oftentimes take place and walking out your door and existing in a public area often gets missed. And so when you get into those leadership spaces and start having these conversations, oftentimes we find ourselves being that extra layer of education. Like, we got to show up to inform. We got to show up to, okay, I'm going to give you the codex and the lexicon to not offend me, but also to treat me in some kind of respectful manner, as opposed to, and this is just, you get microaggressions, et cetera, right, across the board. And one example is, I hear this on campus all the time, we need to have a powwow. Which, I think for a lot of people, it's like, I understand what that means, and I just have a different tack on it. And so when I hear things like that in those spaces, it's part of that othering thing that happens. And I don't think it's always intentional. I don't think it's always aimed necessarily, but it does lack a sense of self-reflection. And I think that that's kind of what we're getting at here. When we talk about equity, when we discuss the fairness and just part of existing in community in a place that's 96% self-identifying as white, and I think I say this every time we're up here, that's not our word. That's not us putting that term on you. That's what we were taught throughout our lifetime on how to identify that identity, right, and relate to it. The black, red, yellow, all of these terms don't come from us. They're put upon. And so I really want to be really clear in pointing that out as we use terminology like white and racial identity and so forth, because that is not common among our cultures and our histories and so forth. It's not like indigenous people have merged out of the woods like in the movies, and with hey, there's a white man, right? Speaking perfect English. We had to learn this stuff. That said, let's get back to the questions. Again, I tried not to suck all the oxygen out of the room. Here I am. So as we talk about that lofty value piece, I want to get back to that. Is the concept of equity such a lofty value? And if so, what sorts of barriers are we seeing play out from your own lens? What might be kind of standing in the way of that, and your thoughts? And you can take that from the creative aspect, from the art, from the personal, whatever that might look like.
I think your example of the picture with the person standing to look over the fence, I think that's a pretty apt way of looking at it, especially talking about, moving up, who's in charge, that kind of stuff. You don't have people necessarily on your team. If I am supposed to be representing the African American community and I go to somebody else who's African American and they don't agree with me, that's one less person that I have to work with. Plus, I'm already in a space where, like you said, it's 96% Caucasian, white. And so how do I build a team of people to help me up that are also going to help to diversify, right? Because if I'm just bringing more of the same up with some of the same ideas that are already there, I'm not really solving any of the problem, and I'm not like spreading, that diversity out. Not that it's something to like needs to be viral and it needs to seep into the cracks or anything like that necessarily, but like if I have different ideas and I'm trying to move those ideas up, it's hard to make a team to do that kind of stuff because there's just not the same people with the same ideas or the same feeling of representation in whatever space it happens to be in.
Thank you. Thoughts?
I'm really just curious about your music. What do you do? What's like your thought on like creating a genre of music in a state that maybe isn't so like, hip and hopping?
I think with the internet, like I don't have to feel like I create music for here. I love performing in town. I think I get the most drastic swings of like people who want to show up and be there and people who don't care about hip hop at all. I think most of the artists I interact with in town really do care about hip hop music, the art that they make. And so I can't really feel like there isn't a place for my music per se. I also, like I said, the internet exists. People can release whatever. I am trying to make stuff that exists on a large scale. Like I love performing at the ZAC. This is a great venue. It's a great opportunity. I'm trying to play the Grizz Stadium. Like, I'm not trying to be here all the time. This is amazing. We have this space. It's fun to be here. But that's the ultimate like move. So yeah, I guess it feels a little bit confined just because there aren't as many opportunities. You brought up like rock bands and stuff. People just show up on the corner and play a rock concert, or country music or whatever. I don't have a guitar. Like, I can't play instruments. I can't just like show up somewhere. It's abrasive to people if you show up and like set down a speaker and just start rapping aggressively. Like, I don't feel like I rap like about aggressive topics, but the energy is pretty pointed and aggressive. And so it's I guess that would be kind of a draw. Like, I don't feel like I can just go to the park and start rapping, I guess is probably where I'm held up at.
You should.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You talk about the place like the ZAC and so forth and having that goal in mind. What kind is it cool to mention other venues? Where have you performed? I've
performed here at Monk's, at the VFW. I have actually performed in the Grizz Stadium, but it was kind of they did this graduation matters thing, and they pulled all the freshmen out of school and put them in the stadium, and then had us come in and rap a couple songs for them, just so it was fun for the kids to be yanked out of school, to tell them to stay in school. But I've performed in the Adams Center for a similar style event. Yeah, kind of all over the place.
Awesome. Thank you. Lofty. Is it lofty? How do we get past this lofty business?
What do you mean?
There's this idea that these things are sort of maybe somewhere out there in terms of equity and so forth. And Alex, I mean, you're very much involved in you're literally in the field and guiding people and participating in a way that is like right now, today action, right? Myself, and just to provide some context, myself at the university, as an advisor, I I think, role with students where I'm more listening and trying to understand what their experience is to try and get them to the resources, et cetera, instead of, being a life coach. Like, here's what you need to be doing. Here's how you need to be thinking about school. This is what you need to be getting out of it. I'm trying to understand where they're coming from and listening to the things that they're struggling with. And we get like students who with disabilities of broad range. We get students who have a lot of the racial justice components that factor into their experience on campus and so forth. And so I'm always trying to utilize that space in that context, as well as just being what we talked about earlier, that a stakeholder and a face. I reflect not, I think, what students are used to seeing, particularly our Indigenous students that come and participate in our program and are like, this is refreshing. I get to be me in this space and talk about the things that affect them, rather, our Indigenous students, where the person on the receiving end who's going to be providing reference or maybe helping communicate those concerns to other entities on campus definitely has that same Indigenous lens. So I bridge in that space and so forth. And so that's, I think, part of the work. And I think there was a time where the idea of having more Indigenous leadership in a space like that was pretty lofty. And I think that for me is an example of how I participate and try and move past that. But when I look around that space, I don't see a lot of me represented in leadership and so forth, and even the job searches and how that stuff goes out to communities and so forth, and where that type of leadership is targeted in terms of onboarding. So that to me is, I'm seeing that sort of loftiness and saying, God, we got to get past that. And I need to continue to be what my boss, I think, refers to us as passionate disruptors. Those of us who are in this program, she says, my people are passionate disruptors. And we get in there and do that sort of challenge in those spaces, right? Leadership and so forth. And it ain't easy. It ain't easy. And there's not a lot of job security when you're pushing those buttons in those spaces. So maybe that's kind of where I'm coming from, is like, does that help kind of give an idea of where you can be proactive in the combating the loftiness piece?
I mean, I'm pretty much just like a world spinner in my head, and I've been thinking a lot, like, oh, what do I need, and what maybe have other people needed that are feeling the same way I do, and even if it's just specifically like local or POC or DIY artists, like, you have all these galleries on Higgins that are selling a lot of things for a lot of money, and you have all these artists. Like, is there a way that local artists, POC, can we have a section of that gallery for free for a month, like a year? I was even thinking of, are there any artists who are Anglo-Saxon who would be open to not creating for a year and just listening? Just is like a world, imagine. It doesn't have to happen, but just imagine.
No, I love it. I've worked with some of the organizers of Tell Us Something and served as a chair on that committee, and was invited into that space actually for that BIPOC leadership. It was very, very intentional from Mark Moss to step forward and say, we want someone in this space who can speak to a world perspective that he himself, in his own words, said he couldn't identify with. And I thought that was like, to me, that was like, whoa, the clouds part. It's this moment where you see that generosity, and the kind of generosity I think it often takes in that space. I found that to be like really profound leadership. And I think the other part of that was challenging him in that space. And I just threw it out in that same context. I said, what if, how about this, man? What if the stories for a year for Tell Us Something had nothing to do with white identity? What if we just had our BIPOC community represented in that space in all of its diversity. And we came across several challenges in that thinking. First of all, getting people to the space, right? To feel like this really is for them, as opposed to, hey, help us promote this 501c3 and buy our tickets, man, because we got some brown people on stage. We really were like endeavoring to avoid that look, right, and those optics. But in that space, we found it like so challenging, you know, in 96% white. So who's going to come forward and take part and be in those stories? And I said, well, as we move forward, let's try this. Let's really push toward this someday, and maybe put it in the back burner. We can do a lot of that recruiting as we go forward, and maybe this kind of cooperation or working in spaces where BIPOC voices are becoming more of a target, or a highlight rather of their storytelling. Maybe that's a step in that direction, to kind of build that trust, because history just tells us again and again of non-BIPOC entities going into BIPOC communities with great answers to their problems, right? And this sort of prescriptive kind of approach. And I think that the wound is still fresh from a lot of that. And, you know, as we talk about the equity piece tonight, I think trust is another aspect of that. And so I guess when I talk about the lofty piece, and maybe this is a more eloquent way of moving toward that, is how do we build the trust? How do we get to the point where, you know, we can actually start extending trust in those spaces? And for me, at least, from what I see in this observation, is people represented and being listened to in their own context, and who I think, you know, it's high time. At least in this kind of space. And I think Missoula is more conducive to that. Maybe less so in Billings, maybe less so other places, not to tear those spaces down, but Missoula's always been known as kind of keep Missoula weird, right? Hippie-ish, right? There's all of those sort of like nomenclatures go along with this community, that maybe it's a little more accepting and so forth, but how do we push out further? Maybe.
Keep it open rather than just weird, like also other perspectives of that, other bodies, and yeah, just kind of shake up the homogeny.
For sure. Can I get a time check real quick? 3:07. Oh, 3:07. Okay, so we got some time left. Good. All right, I want to move on to some other stuff here as we go forward. So often when we hear opposition to the concept of equity in our mainstream media, we hear the pushback described as a reversal of rights for the privileged, right? And I think that this is part of that loftiness thing. In your own experience, as you've been kind of coming into this space, are you hearing about, are you experiencing, maybe not, maybe that's something that doesn't impact you directly, the pushback to the equity piece? And Alex, you might see some of this, I'm not sure. I know that on campus when Indigenous voices come forward, oftentimes they're, hey, you know, we understand that you guys want more opportunity, but you're going to be taking from someone else's resources to get that equity. Is that something that anyone here has like been confronted by or had to deal with? Maybe not.
Everyone's been so nice up here. These are some of the nicest people I've ever met, these Northerners, truly. But I'm just, yeah, I think, so I haven't been met with that specifically. I don't know what anyone's saying at the kitchen table after they meet me, but yeah, I would be even just curious with the idea of like what, for those specifically who, you know, identify as artists, how do you feel about, yeah, silencing yourself and listening for a bit? Just because that's been my whole experience, is to listen, to reflect, and I think that's what we need in order to actually connect and then become just a bunch of humans. Not necessarily equal, but respect and balance.
Well, I mentioned that, I mean, like, for example, Reservation Dogs, right? The beautiful show. It will take you all places, emotionally and so forth. And it's direct storytelling, it's direct mythology, it's direct, the creating of that mythos in a modern context. I mean, I can sit back and like do a dissertation on its brilliance in terms of how it communicates Indigenous identity from a contemporary perspective. I'll spare you all that, of course. But that said, for me, I've waited my whole life for this show, right? And this is going back to a time when I was watching What's Happening and, dating myself. But that said, these are the shows that I had that were like good times, right? And I mean, listen to that theme music to that show. It tells you like, it translates into today, but that's not the sum of our parts, right? That those narratives and so forth. But I've always longed for the Indigenous identity in the storytelling space. And so as an actor, as a writer, as a content creator, I am seeing a lot more ability now, I think, to be, I've said it before in this, and it's maybe a little tasteless, but it's like Indians are hot right now. We're hot. We're like out there and people want to see more. I'm getting more acting gigs. People are like, I'm getting more like feedback on that, right? Right, yeah. It's like, and that's cool, right? Will this phase pass? I don't know. But what I'm loving about it is the fact that our stories are now getting out there, right? And you see that, I think, with this last Oscars, right? There was Everything Always All at Once. Which, what a trip, for sure. But it's not the kind of storytelling that I think we're always used to receiving and being allowed to take part in and imagine oneself in and so forth. And that our face on the billboard, so to speak, right? I think that's kind of where this question goes. What is that pushback? Are we taking away from someone, right, to be more forward and tell stories? And I think we deal with this on campus, like creating opportunities for more students. Does that really detract from other people's opportunity? Which it doesn't, by the way, if you look at the data and so forth. And so oftentimes these narratives are made up. All the way to reverse racism, right? That word just baffles me. Because if you actually think about racism in reverse, and you've experienced racism, you get a very different context of what that would look like, and so forth. But I'm kind of starting to ramble here. But that said, I guess what trying to get at is furthering, I guess, part of. Is it really taking away from other people for us to have equity?
I think first I want to like highlight that being a creative person, you got to like put yourself out there, and it's dope that everyone here, I'm sure most people in this room have a creative outlet. And I think it's a unique opportunity to highlight yourself, highlight your community, highlight whatever you want, highlight food. I just recently found this rapper. She's this Filipino lady. She raps about ramen. So good. So good. But there's like there's nothing like serious about it. She's just rapping about like spicy noodles. It's like, hell yeah, But I think with that, there's that spectrum of like, you can do that, but you can also make meaningful music, or you can make meaningful community. And so like, I think that it's a powerful tool to be a creative person. And I think most people have a creative side to themselves, I'm sure, somewhere in there. And I think being able to utilize that in whatever way you want is pretty cool. And I think pushback-wise, I think the pushback really is just like being creative. Like I think creativity is like constantly like a push into either yourself or the system, or like people that you might not agree with, or systems that you might not understand. And so I feel like just being a creative person can often feel like you're pushing back against something, you know, maybe even just a budget, or like maybe it's just like a mic, or I need a camera lens, I'm pushing back against my finances or something like that. But in the work that I'm doing, I feel like I've been able to build just using photos that I've taken of people during our trips or with different clients that I work with, is just like unfiltered joy. It's pretty cool to be able to photograph people in their moments of happiness and their moments of people doing things. And I think oftentimes with communities of color, like, at least, I mean, really for a long time, it's always been depicted in moments of tragedy or moments of hard labor or moments of working hard or things like that. But I think, you know, for me, it's about flipping the narrative a little bit and just only doing people smiling. And I think maybe that speaks to more just, I don't like to be sad, and I don't want to see other people sad either, or else we'll all be sad people. So, but you know, I mean, there are definitely people who make, you know, really serious art, serious photography, and I really enjoy that. But I think for myself, I really love to share people's joy and be able to highlight that joy. And I think that joy also pushes back on a lot of people who might not understand, like, there can be different communities of people who smile and enjoy their day and can be up in the mountains or in a studio, like, doing their thing and expressing themselves. And I think that's like been such a unique opportunity to not only see people happy, but see how that also pushes back on people. I think a lot of people might be like, what? Like, why is this person so happy doing that, you know? And it's like, that's not my story to tell, but it's cool to be able to, you know, share that moment with them and also depict that moment to other people that might be like, I just don't understand why someone would be so happy doing something like that. And so maybe it's not necessarily about, and I relate to you as well, right? Like, it's just like we're humans, and I think smiling and expressing joy and being happy is like this inherent human thing, you know? And so being able to convey that and connect that with people through photography or, you know, the different avenues that we all have it's a cool way to like push back, but also kind of like bring in a constant kind of like state of like rocking the boat, but you're like moving in a direction, you know? Yeah.
I guess I think that I've heard the sentiment of like, for equity, like it's going to take away from somebody else. I think it's hard for people to wrap their brains around the fact that there's space for everybody, and just because somebody else is getting an opportunity doesn't mean that that has to impede on any way on somebody else's opportunity, right? The idea of creating the space is that it is exactly that. It's creating the space. It's not taking part of another space or replacing another space. It is creating a new space for a new person or idea or, you know, set of parameters, if you want to go that way, that is available, right? So you were saying you had to move up into that space at the university to be at the table, and then what changed? You're there is what changed, right? And so it didn't hurt anybody else there, and now it allows you to move up on that level and in that space and start creating the spaces for other people that are coming along behind you. So I think I would agree that it doesn't exist as far as like taking away from other people's opportunities or rights or space to give space to other people who haven't had them before.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to the panel, where I'm really going with this is like, we see states enacting laws, right? And by the way, 50 years of hip hop, we just like celebrated 50 years of hip hop and in this country from its birth to where it is now. And I think I'm now like going, damn, 50 years, huh? Okay, all right, let's slow down a little bit. But that said, we see like states enacting laws that are pushbacks, literally pushbacks, book banning, right? Taking books out of schools because said books challenge that perhaps 96% in a place like Missoula, although I don't know if that's happening here necessarily, but it is, you see it happening very like deeply in other states. LGBTQ plus identity and membership in community is being outlawed, right? And historically has been, but then we move forward from that and we were undoing things, and then now like moving back to this really pretty hard line kind of laws about what one's existence can be. And so, I mean, all of this is moving us away from equity, right? That is not equity. That is the ability to go get medical care, and advice, insight, planning, health planning for oneself, based on one's need, right? Is literally being written off of the books, and you can, but this group over here, no, because of NRN, whatever sort of toxic lens might be fitted in there. But that's it. That's kind of where I'm going with this, is like we live in a world right now where we're kind of on this precipice, and some people have described it as like the last dying breath of something that needs to be gone, and maybe past its time, to like, how do we get this hope for the equity piece? And that's where I'm going with the lofty, and the pushback, et cetera. Is like some people are being outlawed out there in the world, and where can our art be expressive with that? I like that because I would love to go downtown, by the way, and just see some like hard hitting, like rhymes and presentation on the street side, because I've seen all other form of busking along the way, and that would be dynamite, by the way. And yet, if it make people uncomfortable in their seat, fantastic, right? But that's it. I guess this is where I'm going with all of this question toward this is, how do we protect and preserve that move toward equity as we go forward? And do you see yourself having a part in that? And where's your creativity coming in?
Something that's really saved me and my mental health in living in this world is completely avoiding it and recognizing that there are other worlds. And a lot of that has to do even just growing up multicultural. My mom's Mexican, my dad's Cuban, could not be any more different. Their worldviews, same language, but totally different worldviews. And, as far as those whose bodies are being policed, trans people, women, you can still get the abortion. You can still get the testosterone. We all have the outlets. We all can take care of one another. We are, even if we're being outlawed, we can still live and we can continue, just like we always did as multiracial people, as women. You keep going, and for me, I just completely avoid this world, completely. And I don't know if that's the answer. I don't have the answer but that's just helped me a lot, and creatively, that's what I present. A different world. For instance, I feel like our job is not that different. I go to nature all the time, and the work that I do is completely based in nature, but I'm in it, and I'm putting bodies in it as if we are a part of it, which is a different perspective of like riding a bike through it. But there is like a through line there. There is a connection. We're both receiving the healing nature of nature, but it's a different world point view. What is it when we're actually a part of it rather than just like on it? And so I feel like creatively, my whole thing is, how can I show the different perspectives? This doesn't have to be true. Like, yes, we're illegal in certain perspectives, but the reality is that you are not. That's not true. That's a worldview perspective that's being put on you. So for me, creatively, that's been something that I like to share, that I feel like I was blessed with as a child, just this ability to kind of see outside, and something I continue to hone as an adult, and I would like to share. But yeah, even just, I had the honor of being able to lead a bunch of bodies through a scream ritual in the Capitol at Helena for trans rights. And I talk about, I've avoided this world completely, and then I get to walk into the Capitol, and this like beautiful stage is there for us to all lay on and be echoed through. And on the walls are these like paintings that are so in such a specific world point view. And while we're screaming, having this really healing experience on this land. I remember looking up and seeing this older bodied man, gentleman. He was looking, he's gone like this. And I thought in that moment, I remember like it hitting my heart, but then I was like, he can have that. That's not going to stop this moment from happening. And if I focus on that, and it's so easy to focus on that because that's what we're taught to focus on so that we can be separate from one another and not actually find cohesion and connect and actually possibly live in a country where we all might kind of get along a little more. It's possible to just also let him have his right to do that because that's a part of the world we created too, right? It's a free country. Okay, he can have that. But if it's getting in the way of my rights, but can I also continue to do what I want? Hell yeah. Get the abortion, get the tea, get what you need. You know you have each other to supply for one another. So for me, like I said, no actual answer, but just offering different perspectives. And as having a family too that comes from other countries, we have a lot more rights here than a lot of other fucking places. And we can make shit happen, even if it, in a way, it's illegal. I don't know if what I'm saying is legally right for me to be saying. But alas, I just continue to exist in your story, I think is what I'm trying to sum up and say.
That's awesome. Thank you. I mean, Alex, you create a space for BIPOC representation, for BIPOC community, for BIPOC people specifically, right? Are you robbing the 96% of their opportunity? Are you lessening that in any kind of way? If not, how? Why?
We took 5 backpacking trips, and we just didn't see anybody, so I don't think we're impeding on anybody's. We're just the only people out there. And I think the idea of like stepping on someone else's toes or can you say that? How did you ask?
Well, did you get much pushback when you were creating this? Was there any like,
Sure.
well, how are the white people going to feel? Like, are you going to leave folks out? Like, is that exclusionary?
Sure. I think we get that question pretty often, and I think people, like to leave their questions, and I think the main thing is just like there has been intentional communities for a long time, whether that's you bring your friends to the holidays over to your house, and that's a community, or you bring together your friends over the span of a birthday, or different things like that. And I think, or to celebrate a different community, to celebrate 50 years, to celebrate, land, water, whatever it might be. And so I think that it's more just about communicating that it's not what that person might be perceiving it as. And so I feel like the main way that I've been able to navigate that conversation is just by talking about the intentional communities that person has been in. Whether that's like you play golf with your boys, like you go and do these things, like that's an intentional community that you're creating for yourself. And this intentional community was created with different people in mind. And it's not to exclude anyone, it's just that I'm giving attention to the communities that I want to work with, and as a member of this society, I get the opportunity to do that, and I think that's something that I want to take advantage of because I don't really see too much of it. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Arnaud, any thoughts?
Nope.
Okay, very good. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the presentation period. I'm trying to get a glimpse at the clock over there. I'm not trying to look past you, but that said, as we wrap up here, all right, and first of all, thank you all for taking the time to be here today. We're gonna pivot into some questions from the audience, so be thinking about what you would like to be asking our panelists. That said, before we switch into that, really quickly, we're just going to go down the line. I would like to give each of you, the opportunity to share with the audience what's happening, what's going on, where you're going to be next, where's your creativity, where can we see it, what venues, what's next, what's happening.
Yeah,
Jump into it.
All right, so all of my music and stuff is everywhere online, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, all that good stuff. As far as shows, I have a show coming up on the 25th at Suite 2. It's a art gallery in town, and they are a great space. It's small and it feels kind of like a house show community, and it's always really good energy down there. Yeah, there are some big projects coming out. I don't know that they'll be out soon, but you'll start seeing pieces of them that I'm going to be a part of here that I'm not really allowed to talk about that much, but be on the lookout for that. And otherwise, yeah, just trying to get some new stuff together to release some new music here, and hopefully that all goes smoothly.
Awesome, thank you.
I'm a freelancer, so if you need photos, holler. And I would love to collab with both of you at some opportunity. Maybe we can do like a thing, you know?
We can smile together.
I'm
That'd
so
be
down.
That'd be sick.
Careful what you wish for.
That'd be solid. That could be fun. I would love to put that in the air. Let's see. For the program, we have a lot of different activities. We're just online. If you want to look us up, we're here in Montana. Our Instagram is our most busy space where you can see what we're up to. In the fall and winter, if there are opportunities to collaborate, we'd love to do that as well. I think being an outdoor-based community organization doesn't mean that we don't like to do indoor things. We're going to be doing an indoor clay studio nights with Chrissy over there, and so I think that we'd love to broaden our horizons as well. And so if there are opportunities to do music or to connect, we'd love to do that as well. Let's see. I think that's it for me, yeah. And the program, I think we're kind of like sailing into the fall and winter. We had a really long summer. We have like 2 more trips left, so we're done for our summer. Yeah.
I'm in a huge state of rest that I'm entering. The last 5 years I was working on a project that I didn't think I was going to be working on for 5 fucking years, that I birthed in the winter, and it was a mythological film and album based off of a reinterpretation of love. And so I'm just kind of feel like I am postpartum, just kind of chilling, and I did a show a few weeks ago here at the ZAC that was a little traumatizing for me, and so I'm taking a step back while I'm here on this land to listen to the land again and what the land might need from me while I'm here and vice versa. But I feel very open to what is next. I'd like to have a baby, so I'm trying to like prep my body for that. These are things I'm going through right now.
Awesome, and I love the collab energy that happens in this space and in these conversations. The idea, I think that's also part of the ingredient here is to bring us together and get our energies sort of like interacting and engaging and so forth. So let's keep that up, and I love that idea. That said, just really quickly here, let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Very much deserved, and thank you so much for your time, your energy, your insights. I know that these are not easy conversations. You're literally put on the spot here, so that's part of it too. So a huge gratitude for your generosity in that respect as well. That said, let's move forward into the Q&A piece. Please, I think we're audible and so forth, so feel free to raise a hand or shout out a question. I open up the panel to you, the audience, to ask some questions if you'd like to go deeper. Please, Mia.
Yeah, in terms of leadership positions and BIPOC, so with Cohesion, we are looking for a project director. And when we've been putting out the job description, we can't say seeking by a BIPOC person. And so, in terms of equity and it's open to everyone, but obviously we would want a leadership position to be a BIPOC person. So, that's an interesting question of like, how do we approach that?
I got the answer. You know the good old boys club? Do the same thing, man. That thing still rocks around Missoula. You can do the same thing. Just wait around for the right person, There's a good old boys club. There can be a good old colored people's club. We're just waiting for the right one. Or maybe I don't know, there can be a time, I think patience is a good thing. And I think not rushing into giving someone a position because of their qualifications is, it's important. But I think the good old boy club is huge here. They're like, oh, my sister just got hired to this firm. And you're like, what, dude, how? And so why not apply the same thing? And I think that there's a part of being a human where we don't have to be so noble. We all work and live in society that's very capitalistic. So what makes you more noble than anyone else to be like, oh, but we must do it this way? It's like, you really don't, though. You could just be like, we're just going to wait for the right person, and even though there's a lot of qualified people, you're not the right one. It's like dating. Maybe that's my dating life. That's pretty bad. But I think applying the good old boy club thing it's a real thing, and I think using that it's worked for many corporations. It's worked for billion-dollar industries. It can work for a small little community thing, Yeah. Sorry if that was out there advice.
I love it. Did anyone else have a thought on that? I think that also including in some of your language, and this is, working for a campus, we deal with this as well when we want to be intentional in our hiring. And believe me, it's come up. We include in the job search someone who has a direct personal experience with some of these perspectives and can speak to a community that is looking for the services you're providing. And it doesn't speak of race. It doesn't talk about. It allows you to in that interview space say you don't have it. You don't have that lens. We're looking for someone with that lens, but it doesn't codify a racial identity piece. So, as a 501c3, it helps you avoid some of those sticky points.
I think my kind of question pairs well with that. I think what we were talking about with equity and how it's seen as a drain on some other opportunities for other people, what I frequently encounter in this community and just in general in this country is the lack of understanding that equity inherently means that you have to spend resources, sometimes your own resources, in order to, say, fill that position. You have to wait longer. You have to seek people out actively. And I feel a lot of rage when it comes to the fact that when I look around at the people who are building communities, when I look around at the people who are doing that good work, it is often people who are darker than me. Those are the people who are lifting me up. And how do you productively deal with those feelings? How do you productively channel that rage into your art? How do you productively build community off of, seeing the winning and losing?
Okay, I think a perspective that I try to bring to a lot of things that I'm involved with is getting to versus having to. It changes the lens a little bit of I get to provide this opportunity or I get to be a part of this thing that's happening versus it being a chore and I have to be a part of this or I have to do this thing. I think it's the same with any, starting a new job, okay? You get there, you have to train, you have to learn the job, right? And if you think about it as I have to learn all this new stuff versus, I'm here, I get to learn all this new stuff, I get to expand myself as a person, it really changes that perspective and makes it a little bit more of an opportunity and a positive thing. I think that for me personally, that helps me stay on the more positive side of that, because it can feel like a chore, being like, oh, I have to show up to this thing and talk to people, or I have to, make this deadline, or whatever is going on. It makes it a little bit more. It brings back the control to you a little bit, and makes it feel as more of an opportunity if you get to do it versus you have to do it.
Rage, dude. I love that. I use rage all the time. Just be angry. I just start shit with people all the time. I just piss people off. But that's because I have an opportunity. I have my own organization, right? Like, I've got no boss. I'm my own boss. This lady was like, who's your boss? And I was like, hold on one second. Beep, it's me. What's up? And she's like, F you, and like hung up the phone. And I was like, all right, and that's not to say that's great business practice, but like, rage is such an important thing to feel. Like, that's an emotion you have. That's an emotion we all have. Like, use it, I don't know like exactly how like productive my rage can be in terms of like anger, but I think rage in terms of like productivity and just like raging through like my emotions, or how I might like be very unfiltered in a conversation, I just feel so much better about it, because it's like, now you got to see an unfiltered version of myself, and if you don't like that, then like, see you later, And I think it makes my interactions with people very quick. It's like, we're either gonna get along or we're not, or you're wasting my time or I'm wasting your time, so let's not even jam, So keep raging.
And I think rage is such an opportunity to use that fire to actually create change. But just in the work that I do, and in knowing you personally and our own kind of warrior spirit that we inherited from our own ethnicity, I think embodiment of that rage so that you can channel it, so what actually is injuring you can be released so you could channel the change after. I just think embodiment is the revolution, y'all. Like, we also in our heads, on our phones, and now we're in the north. It's like we are right here, and our whole body has an intelligence, and when you feel that rage and you keep it right here, you might make yourself sick. So to just fucking feel it, scream it, you have a whole terrain that is waiting for you to pay attention to it. Use it. It's here, and I think that when you channel it and actually feel it in your full body, you can release what parts of it that are weighing you down so that you could move forward with your warrior spirit and like create change.
I like that. To expand on that, you are the literal representation of the entirety of your lineage in this moment. And when I look at it, I'm in my 50s, so I've ruminated on some of this stuff in my lifetime, and rage is something that has been directed inward and it's been directed outward. And I remember years ago, like when I had to get into it because I was just at the end of my limits, it was drink too much and go to Stockman's and just throw down with someone. And that wasn't a real productive way of going about it. And I learned that in hindsight. That was something that I gained knowledge of after the fact. Maybe not such a great idea. But I know for me in recent years and in the study and in the discourse has been coming to the realization that being BIPOC and dealing with racism is like being a family member in an alcoholic family. Trying to solve the problem that someone else is struggling with that gets put onto you. And until that entity realizes that it's got a problem, ain't no change gonna happen. And it's a place of being captured in a sense of powerlessness, oftentimes. And I think I was hearing you correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but you talked about people who are browner than you out in the world solving the problem, right? Or trying to solve the problem in some way, which means that we're out here picking up the mess that we didn't create. And we're even being further like badgered, like, well, if you guys would just stop talking about racism, it would go away, right? As if something that we are doing, bringing awareness to these facts, having these conversations and so forth. Yeah, it's enraging. It is, and I think acknowledging your feelings in that is a part of it, but also connecting to the survival and the representation and the very meaning of your presence in this space speaks to something much bigger than ourselves, and our membership to something that I think is far nobler. I had someone contextualize to me one night in the strangest of moments, talked about how she could see my aura kind of thing, right? And whether I subscribed to that or not wasn't important for the moment, but this person said that they could see all of my lineage standing behind me in that moment. And it really brought me into this place of empowerment where I was like, yeah, it is a marathon. It isn't a sprint. It is going to be ongoing. My children are going to inherit some of this stuff, that sort of alcoholic influence on a family member who just never signed up for that, right? And I think that that's an important way of looking at it. And so be good to yourself, be kind to yourself, and make that if anyone's going to be generous to you, it's got to be you. And keep coming to these kinds of spaces and join these conversations. And, you know, honestly, I've seen you at a couple of these, and I've been waiting for, when is this person going to be on stage? Right? And I've seen that around, but it's like next time, right? And so keep the invite in your mind and open, and know that your voice is valuable in these spaces. And that I think for those people who are wanting understanding and who are coming into these spaces where it is not always easy to hear that, like, yeah, I guess white identity is like a drunk alcoholic that like rages on everyone else, right? And that's a really sort of base way of looking at it. But in terms of the overall powerlessness part of that, I think collectively we all support each other, and I think participating in those spaces and finding validation in your own voice is just being part of that other community. But, no, please.
You said a term that I do not know, reverse racism. What is this term? I've never heard this before.
That's good. That's good that you've never heard this term. So the question was, what is reverse racism? It is not real, is what it is. It's a term that makes an attempt to flip the script on racism. So us here talking about our experiences and the impacts of racism on our lives is somehow seen as an attack on someone who doesn't maybe side with that, has never been racist in their life, they don't have a racist bone in their body, is one, even though racism doesn't come from your bones. It is a learned experience, and it has to be unlearned. And that term itself, and please jump in, is something that I think that is put out there to silence. You mentioned silencing, and I think further the invisibility and the alienation of BIPOC identities, to say, you know, enough of this complaining about racism. You're making me feel bad. Now you're a reverse racist because you're saying it's my fault.
I just had to get that term straight. I was like, what is reverse? But I think my greater question is just like, how do we de-academicify this conversation? Like, I would probably like, the concept of equity does not really make sense to me, because it's something that's like intrinsic, you know, like being here and one with people is just like natural. That's like where I'm at. And like, I feel kind of like lost in these sorts of conversations, because like, I would get in trouble here. I got in a lot of trouble when I was in Missoula because I didn't give a fuck. I was very exclusionary. I'd be like, if you are white and straight, get the fuck out of this party. I don't want to see around sitting around like escort people out. Not great, I guess, but also, you know, very abrasive. But like, then I would get dragged into these colonializing spaces, discussions, round tables that like, at the end of the day, it's like, what is what are we all talking about? There's so many terms. Like, I don't understand how we can push this vibe, this like through line vibe. And like, these conversations are really great. I do appreciate the space, but like some of this stuff I feel like goes a little over my head, and I feel dumb when I'm like, that's not like, this is a different style of discussion. So I'm just curious, like how do we, facilitate this and do this, but like don't have to rely on the language that is like this. I don't know. I'm not to shit on this party. This is great, but like, I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm sorry.
I think that's such a great question, and it comes up with me a lot. I never went to college. I got kicked out of high school. That was my scholastic career. Like, I went up to my junior year, and I have a fantasy in my head of like, one day I'll go to college, and I'll be like Reese Witherspoon in Pleasantville, like reading my book, and and how that's like excluded me from specific types of conversations, because you can tell when someone was taught how to speak in a certain way because they were entered into this world and this system, and it's so beautiful. But I also feel the same way, and I think I struggled a bit on this term equity, and I was so glad for the picture because that was the easiest way for me to understand that. And again, I don't have the answer, but I really just feel, if I could just say it again, embodiment. Because yeah, not everyone even, and a lot of the people that really are actually being affected 10 times more than us three privileged creators don't have access to this kind of language, don't even speak English. And so I think embodiment creates change. And I believe in energy too, and what you are sends out this kind of vibration into the world, and it's not going to change the whole thing, but you're doing something as you embody that person, and in your belief, in your value, you're creating a wave that is sent into the world that people can feel. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is, such an amazing opportunity, but also I'm like, how do we get on the ground? How do we sit in a circle? How do we hold one another? Why aren't we holding one another? Why aren't we looking right into each other's eyes? And that's a part of me that I know I have and I've nourished because I wasn't introduced into a specific system of thinking, learning, and being. And so I just think embodiment. I don't particularly have an answer.
It's just I feel like we're using methods created by whiteness to discover ourselves. It's very difficult for me to play 4D chess with in my brain. I didn't get the script on these terms, and what are we doing? What are we doing? We should be chilling and not playing 4D chess about our experiences.
But I think it creates a bridge, because it's like none of us were inherited this language in a way, but we've learned it. So how do we create that bridge for those who, like our own parents, my dad could barely speak English. How do I create a bridge for him to even survive in this world? And it's by learning how to speak the languages of other people, including the worlds that maybe didn't invite us to begin with. We are kind of coming face to face with the colonizer inside of ourselves too.
Yeah, I relate to that, because even for the programming, we have a lot of educated people. You know what I mean? But we also have a lot of people who aren't, and similarly, I had to explain to my parents what I do, and they were like, actually, we don't understand. And I was like, okay, that's okay. And I think that it is a very academic, it's a deterrent. Language can be a deterrent as much as it can be something that boosts our society. I think even with how we've decided as a team, to how do we outreach to our communities and things like that, and we've decided not to use any of that language, and just let either the photos speak for themselves, or just kind of let interpersonal relationships be the method, mindfulness, connecting, really just being, embodying each other. That's been pretty important, because I feel for the last couple years, it made everybody who lived here, all of a sudden we were in space, seeing all the crazy hectic things that are happening in our society, and but we're still people that live here, and so taking a 1,000-mile view and dialing it all the way down to a 10-inch view has been really helpful. But I agree, like it's a pretty hectic thing, and I actually have a lot of inner conflict with that, even with running my own program. And so we're like trying to develop a way to be just like an intentional program, but to have more like, to not make it about like a thing or like a concept, you know what I mean? But it's very difficult, and I'm figuring it out slowly, but I think you bring up a really good point on like how like almost like high level this sort of conversation can be to most people that, don't have that academic knowledge or the language. They're not around that community that's like, are you, all these acronyms, and you're like, what, dude, like, and so I think that's, it's big for sure.
It's a fair question. I think it's a fair point as you talk about that, because it's an unnatural way of being and thinking, of having to explain oneself in the presence of an oppressor, or what has historically been an oppressor. And having operated in academia, I grew up in a family where my father was a college professor and my mother was a teacher, high school teacher. And so that was like always being programmed into me growing up, which is a place of privilege as well. And I guess to summarize it is, there is so much language in academia, terminology, perspective that has already been weaponized against BIPOC communities, that in order to sometimes blow a hole in that, you've got to walk through the door and say, I'm smarter about this than what you have, what has been on offer, or what is presently on offer. And I'm going to come to you in your language and in your context and explain it with a granular breakdown and understanding of what it is that is being put upon. And in that way, it gives it no place to run and hide, because historically it's like to ensconce itself in this academia, to say black people don't get an education and therefore are disadvantaged in these conversations. And it's an uncomfortable place to be, and to be like earning your paycheck from an entity that oftentimes limits access, from a racial perspective even though it may not be aware of it. That is something that, in order for me to be effective in that space, I have to be able to go in there and blow people's minds. And I've also been if you're not this, get the F out, right? And I do that in my own spaces, and I've created that in my own life where I have those boundaries in the spaces and places that I participate in. And if I'm asked to show up and take part in a conversation like this, I do my best to communicate to the people that don't have my understanding of the world, to kind of reach this space and maybe just at least hear it for a minute and see what some of the problem is. And I think that goes back to the alcoholic. Why do I need to have the understanding of how to work with alcoholics if I myself am not the one with the problem? And it's an unnatural place to be. So, yeah, and thank you for the question. Toward the back here.
I just have some thoughts and I guess questions on what you were talking about, spaces for BIPOC artists, whether you're an artist, photographer, performer, that it seems like a lot of times it's on the fringe. We've worked with, especially with Cohesion, worked with other organizations that are led by, white leadership, et cetera. They're like, oh, why don't you have a show at a coffee shop? So why did the BIPOC artist should be at a coffee shop when, white artists, like you said, on Higgins, there's a gazillion galleries and so forth. And it has been really challenging to find a space that we can give, in terms of equity. This is April, who couldn't be here today because she's sick, but her goal of starting all of this also is that it's not just showcasing this, but placing artists in front of people, collectors, other, artists have the opportunity to sell their art or perform in front of people. And so I just wanted to say Leslie Millar is here today because she's the owner of the Brunswick Artist Studios, and she's been generous and kind enough, because you were saying, can people reduce prices or give us a space? So in November, we're doing a Cohesion artist exhibition, BIPOC artists, live performance art, music, and so forth. But, there are people in the community that can help us do this, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and why does it need to be a challenge? To, find a place to showcase BIPOC artists. And, you voiced your experience of having the challenge of getting in there, and you were saying, like, having to conform your creativity to try to fit in with other things, but, like, what could we do to create more space in our community where it's just natural and elevated?
Dude, start shit with people who don't agree with you. I'm serious. Like, even yesterday for that block party, like, one of the businesses had, like, thanks for nothing, like, we don't like, like, this isn't music that we even like, and things like that. And they just had it, like, on their door, And so it's like, well, that person probably knows somebody, this is like a small enough community, especially amongst business owners, where you can be like, hey man, like, what was the point of that? What good does that do for you, other than like, somebody might egg your door tomorrow, But I think a lot of it is to be like abrasive, right? Like, we have hard conversations with each other all the time. So what makes it any easier or harder to just be like, why don't we just try something and do this? And if it goes against someone's beliefs, then just have the abrasive conversation. So it's like maybe applying bravery to the conversation and just, being like, you might have a bigger position than me, but I'm going to poke the bear anyways. Like, I think when I go out into the community and I talk to a lot of the outdoor people, like, a lot of it is pretty abrasive. It's like the Forest Service, they're like government people, and they're like, we just don't understand. And I'm always just like, but you do. Because you're a person, like, you understand this. You're putting like your rule book in front of your glasses and like not seeing that there's like a human element to this. And so I think really it's like being abrasive. Be meaner. No, I'm just kidding. Maybe not meaner, but
Stand your ground.
yeah, stand your ground. Yeah.
I'd just like to say that I owned or managed the Brunswick building, which is studios on Railroad Street, since the mid-70s. Okay, so it's been around for a long time, and I made a decision in cooperation with my husband that even though it has to pay for itself, that we are not looking at it as a nest egg or a big second income or any of that, because I feel like it's really critical to have spaces for mostly visual artists, but writers as well, in the downtown, not like in somebody's spare closet on the perimeter of the city. And I consider myself a socialist, and I have been telling people that consistently for about 10 years when they ask me about it. But I think it requires, there are other people like me too, but we're not like a group. There's no compact, it's an individual action. And so I feel like the people that are trying to make an effort to keep Missoula from becoming some kind of corporate cookie cutter community, which is in danger of becoming, that people like myself have to speak up and talk about it. And I do periodically, but I think we're kind of a hidden subset to what's going on.
Be more abrasive. No, I mean, I think even with like music though, right? Like, you don't see buskers getting complaints because tourists don't call the city and say, hey, this guy is playing bluegrass in the corner. I actually like that, so I'm not going to put in a complaint. But they might see somebody rapping or doing electronic music and be like, I don't agree with that, and we're a tourist-based community, so the downtown association might be like, we got to shut it down because our tourists aren't happy, and that's revenue for whatever business next door, and now that business owner, and so it's all related to money, but it's like, maybe they just need to listen to some music, or like, you know what I mean? I just think that there's a way to like always like reroute a situation to like bring in the human, and then like be abrasive and stand where you believe, and kind of ask the harder questions to people, and persuade, and, you know, use the skills that you have to be like, you're wrong, dude. And that's okay for people to be wrong. I'm not right all the time either.
I do want to get to one last question back there that's been lingering.
My name's Ariel, member of the Blacks, and I grew up in art and stuff, and I agree with what you guys are saying a lot, but I kind of have a totally flip-flopped opinion. It's like, yeah, we don't get a lot of representation, and the representation that we do get is bad, but there's a lot of strength in that. And like, there's a lot of power in imagination. Like, I grew up, it's like I didn't even think about people looking like me, because it's like, like if we're reading, we're in our own heads, we're imagining ourselves in situations. And I know that that's seen as condescending or like academic colonization, but I feel like that's patronizing. Like, education is power, and there's no reason why we can't get that. Sure, we might not be able to as easily get into the most prestigious academic situations that we want to, but we do have the power to educate ourselves. And we've been doing that for a long, long time. And I think a lot of times when we talk about, and I'm not saying that, oh yeah, you're totally wrong or anything, because you are right, we deserve more representation, more diversity within our representation. But what I'm saying is that representation is not necessarily everything, and I feel really strongly about it, because I hear about that more and more and more and more. And it's almost like it's becoming a crush. Like, they don't look like me, I'm not sure if I should try, versus I've been doing this forever, I'm in the game, I'm gonna prove myself. Because honestly, it's like just being different racially, just being different in so many different contexts, it makes you stand out. But what's hard is to maintain your footing. And a lot of times, that's where substance comes in. And then a lot of times with representation, or we're talking about like visual representation, which then goes into video and then sales. And that's where the media aspect comes into it. That's a whole nother thing. And I guess my question would be, is like, do you feel like representation is really like a top level priority, or do you feel like maybe mobilization, or how we create representation that isn't exclusionary, or how do we have representation that is seen without being attached to something that you would sell? Because we do have lots of representation now, like with social media and everything, but is it getting the views? Is the algorithm hitting it? Like, I saw your show, you were phenomenal, right? It was really good. And as a rapper, when I was in DC, it actually went really well out there. Missoula, its rap scene is actually like, it's not really ready for black rappers. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but as like in rock music, that is a lot more inclusionary. And I think that comes down to other things other than race. It's like machismo. It's like, like, yeah, we're here. But the thing about rap music is it's got like a long, like if you go out and rap on the street, I promise you, people are gonna like gather around. Rap is like one of the most community-oriented things, and that is how we got that foothold. You know what I mean? It's like by rapping on the street, it brings people together. And a lot of people made a lot of points. I'm sorry, I had my hand up for a while. It's like you're talking about BIPOC spaces, how do we do that? It's like we do that by fostering the ability of a bunch of different BIPOC people just doing stuff. And then we come together. Like, no, I'm not trying to like racialize you or anything, but there's so few of us that it's hard for us to be like, hey man, you're black, I'm black, let's do that. It's like there's strength in numbers, you know what I mean? And the thing is we don't really have those numbers. There's a ton of white people, and white people aren't sitting there together being like, we're fucking white. And what are we gonna do today before the whites? They just, that's their privilege is that they have strength in numbers. So they're selling the most stuff, they're getting the most money, they're buying everything. It's like when you think about it, dude, there's only like 12% black people in the nation last time I checked. That's such a small number. And Asian people, no offense, y'all just got on TV like 5 years ago. It's so hecked up, man.
Yo, we out here.
Yeah.
Come on now.
I feel like I know you from the
Netflix. No, I'm just kidding.
But isn't that why representation does matter then, so that you have different ideas in different bodies?
Well, representation, it does matter. However, I feel like what is scary to me is that there's a lot of emphasis that is put on representation where it's kind of becoming a crutch, where it's like a new thought. I don't want to do this because I don't have representation. That's kind of...
What word would you use?
Well, what word?
Yeah, just like if we're all here just learning from one another, and this is, we're on the stage, but this is for anyone who wants to speak up, and I'm just curious what word would be used to make you feel like it's not a crutch. What can move us forward?
Imagination.
Imagination?
Yeah, like can you imagine yourself in a situation? Like can you imagine yourself doing something that doesn't need the optics of people, you know?
For sure.
Sorry, so I kind of have, like when I talk, like I feel like I sound like aggressive. I'm totally like I agree, but I just feel like it's really complex and just, sometimes it's delivered in a way that takes away our power.
For sure.
You know, so we don't have that representation, but the lack of representation, it gives us a lot of strength because white people, no offense to y'all, I'm sorry this is gonna be super racist, but it's just the truth. Like, there's so many just like subpar, below average white people out there that are just sad and they don't know what's wrong with them. It's because they are not told that they're at the bottom, so they don't realize that they're at the bottom of things. Like usually, a lot of minorities, we're really good at stuff all the time because we have that pressure where you have to like try really hard, and there's a strength to that. And I don't know, I'm sorry, I get fired up about it. It's a lot to think about, but it's not like, I don't know. The thing is that like, when I see representation, there's like a few people are represented and they don't, it's driving sales, it's not driving thought, and it's driving a super cookie cutter culture that works for such a small percent of the population, where to even just say that it's not like, you can't even, like most white people, they're like, oh, I'm white, they're white, we have representation, they did it, we're better than them. But really, that shit doesn't even apply to them, but since they've been racialized as white, they subscribe to whiteness, they just end up being worse at things than everybody else. I see that all the time in Montana. Like the standard on, I guess standards, back when I lived in Maryland, it's like, by the time that you're 16, if you're playing an instrument, you should probably know all of your scales and be able to improvise. You're going to be able to play wonderfully, and that's for everybody. And since everybody's black, there's like a couple white people in there, and everyone's good at music, so we're not really looking at that. But we still have a bunch of other issues. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah,
sorry, I feel like I'm yelling.
No, I really appreciate it. I appreciate everything that you're laying down, and I definitely want to honor and respect the perspective that you're coming from, of course. And it is a big nuanced and challenged circumstance that we're part of. And I think that it's also important to realize that it's not always everyone else's fault as well. And that doesn't always have to come through our messaging, and I'm with you on that as well. But I do have to jump in for the sake of time, because we've gone past our final spot, and I want to make sure that we're honoring our audience as well, and making sure that we let you get on with your day as well. But that said, thank you for the input, and we really appreciate what you've shared here today. But I also see some of our team here. We do have to wrap up for the sake of the space as well, and thank you.
Should get on the next panel.
That's it. So for the audience, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. We really, really do appreciate your time and the energy, and having the opportunity to listen to everyone here on stage. I want to thank our panelists for taking the time today to engage and share with you all your perspectives and insights. I know that I've learned a lot here today as well. So just really quickly here, let's all put our hands together for our panelists, please. And then I think, do you have an outro, or are you here to?
Really quick, just I wanted to jump in and add something to this conversation, because I guess, well, just as an artist in Missoula and an Indigenous person, for a lot of my life I was told, like, there's no way you're going to be a professional artist. Like, I never saw any Native art in any of the galleries when I was growing up. And I thought that if I could somehow get to a place where my work was represented, that it would be easier and I would have the validation I needed. But now I have my work in public institutions and I'm represented by a gallery, and it's this flip side of things where now people will tell me, you've gotten those opportunities because you're Indigenous, rather than, like, when I moved to Missoula, I wanted to go to art school, and I failed the AP art exam when I was in high school. And I applied to a bunch of coffee shops to have a show, and they didn't even want to show my work. So I showed it at my house and got people to come there. And then from there, I went to the coffee shops, and then from there to the gallery. So I think, like, this is just my own experience. But for me, rather than representation, the thing that I think is most important is to foster connection. Because if we can see one another and help, like, share our own experiences and connect with one another. I know for me it's helped so much to just see other people who believe in my work and see other people's work I can connect to. And I just think that's something that part of why I'm so excited to be part of Cohesion and really grateful for events like this is just it gives us an opportunity to have these conversations and see what's really going on and get different perspectives from people. And yeah, that was just kind of my 2 cents, but I guess and now I have a written outro as well. So we can imagine April is here saying this. But as always, these events are free and open to everybody. We aim to create a safe space and an inviting place to learn and share our cultures. And the Cohesion Advisory Committee is a team of all volunteer and local artists and culture leaders. And before we say goodbye, I just wanted to give another huge round of applause for all of our panelists and also everyone on the Cohesion board who helped. So if you want to stand up, we only have a couple of us here today because April's sick and there's a bunch of other stuff, but I'll just read the names and we can feel happy anyway. It's Nia Hanek, Michelle Boulay, Chrissy Ramirez, Johnina Marquez, me, Stella Nall, and April Ware. Yay! And then we also wanted to give a huge thank you to the ZAC for giving us this space and providing us the place to meet and connect with one another. And we wanted to say thank you to MCAT, who has been recording this conversation. And for those people who weren't able to attend today, you can share it at a later date and we can get more people involved in the conversation. And then we also, while we have all of us here and I have the microphone, we wanted to just announce that we're having this winter group exhibition that's going to be opening in early November. So if you stay tuned with Instagram and Cohesion website, we'll keep you updated about that exhibition and any future events. So this wraps up our summer series, and thanks.
Can I say something just real quick? I know you just did the closing monologue, but it just feels really important. And Dre, since you're here, can you tell us about the MMIW event that you're doing here?
I'm Dre, I'm an artist. Thank you, Natalita. We're doing an Indigenizing ZAC on September 8th, and we've invited Indigenous artists, and we're not really looking for established artists, but emerging artists to make it more of a community feel, and we're doing a benefit for MMIR, and that's the Missing Murdered Indigenous Relatives, and we're hoping to do a walk and then live performances by Jack Gladstone here, and also some smaller traditional drumming, and that's what we're hoping for. And we're inviting other artists as Indigenous, as people not only of this Montana tribes, but also of a variety of different tribes that come from different countries that have made Missoula home, because Missoula is more of a diverse community for Indigenous people, and that's something that as an artist I stepped down from, and it's something I wanted to organize and curate for our Indigenous peoples and give them a safe space and a voice to express themselves however they please. And we've also invited elementary schools and high school students to be a part of, to have their very first show at a gallery opportunity. And that's just kind of educating and helping them bring awareness to our community that we do have talented people in Missoula and surrounding areas. And we call this place home. So thank you, Natalie. And I know Natalita has a piece in there, so thank you.
Thank you, Dre. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone who pulled up.